إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستهديه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، له الملك له الحمد يحيي ويميت وهو حي لا يموت بيده الخير وهو على كل شيء قدير. أشهد أن سيدنا وحبيبنا وقائدنا ومعلمنا محمدا عبد الله ورسوله صلى الله تعالى عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء، واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. أما بعد. All praise is due to Allah. We seek His guidance, His forgiveness, His assistance. We seek refuge in Allah from the evil within ourselves and the evil of our actions. Whomsoever Allah guides, there is no one to lead astray, and whomsoever Allah sends astray, there is no one to guide. I bear witness there is no one worthy of worship except Allah. I bear witness that Muhammad is His servant and His messenger. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, upon his family, his companions, and all those who follow them until the last day. O you who believe, revere Allah as He should be revered, and do not die except in the state of Islam. Beloved brothers and sisters in Islam, today I intend to continue a series that I began several khutbahs ago in addressing and responding to the difficult challenge that exists within our community, as it does within many other communities, the issue of domestic violence. Previously, I have already spoken about the importance of preserving the God-given dignity, nobility, and honor that is given to human beings, whether it is ourselves or towards others. I've also spoken about how to develop and maintain healthy relationships, and I've also spoken about the various forms of domestic violence that exist. Today, I want to focus on the many impacts that are negative that domestic violence has on the household members, on members of the household, and especially those who are most vulnerable, which are our children. The first impact that domestic violence has on our households is that it creates an atmosphere of fear within the home. While there are a wide range of behaviors that can be defined as being abusive, once a person in a relationship becomes fearful of the other spouse or of another household member, then it is highly likely that the relationship has become abusive. We recall the hadith that I mentioned in a previous khutbah of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in which he said, "La yahillu li muslimin an yurawwi'a muslima," that it is not permissible for a Muslim to frighten another Muslim. So this is in general, and so how much more then does again this apply to members of our household? So when we look at children in homes where one parent is abused, the child will feel fearful and anxious. They may always be on guard, waiting for when is the next violent episode or event going to take place. And sometimes they feel, the children, that they're the ones to blame. The children themselves will feel, what did I do wrong that this is happening to my parents? And sometimes they will say that I'm the one to blame, the child themselves. And so this is to show the impact, that one of the impacts that it has on children. Another impact that domestic violence has on members of the household is that it creates feelings of hatred and resentment. So not only does it create fear, but it also creates hatred and resentment. And we know there is a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, narrated by Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu, أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لا تباغضوا ولا تحاسدوا ولا تدابروا وكونوا عباد الله إخوانا. So the Prophet ﷺ, this is in Sahih Bukhari, that Anas ibn Malik narrated that the Messenger of Allah ﷺ said, do not hate one another. That's about. That's the first thing the Prophet ﷺ said in terms of don't do things towards one another that will create feelings of hatred or resentment in the heart. La tabaghadu. Do not hate one another, nor be jealous of one another. Do not turn away from each other. And be servants of Allah, brothers. Create this form of this relationship of love, of brotherhood. So again, this is amongst Muslims. How much more so does this apply to members of our own household? So the first part of the hadith, it tells us we should not do anything that brings a reason about for causing feelings of resentment or hatred between two people. The third impact that domestic violence has is that it creates physical as well as mental health issues. Both physical as well as mental health issues. Children who witness domestic violence or are victims of abuse themselves, they are at serious risk for long-term physical and mental health problems. Children who witness violence between parents may also be at greater risk of being violent themselves in their future relationships. So this is not only short-term, this is long-term. To see the impact that domestic violence has on children. Other impacts, depending on the age of children, may include showing signs of severe anxiety separation or separation anxiety. What is separation anxiety? This is when a child becomes attached to one of the parents, usually it's the mother, for fear that something bad will happen to her if the child is separated from the mother. And so the child will cling to the mother very much strongly out of fear and anxiety. And then if the child is separated from the mother at any point in time, then it has the child will suffer, and it will go through this separation anxiety. A child may also have low self-esteem. A child may also have problems in schools. A child may have, whether it's in terms of grades or behavior, a child may have an increase in terms of headaches and stomach aches. Here now you actually have physical symptoms that are related to because of the psychological impacts. Teenagers that witness abuse, they may act out negatively. They may isolate themselves. They may withdraw. They might become more withdrawn from family and social relationships. They may experience depression. They may engage in risky behaviors that are also un-Islamic, whether it be drugs or alcohol or illicit relationships. They may skip school. They may get in trouble with law enforcement. All these different impacts because they are either witnessing or experiencing any form of abuse. And remember when we spoke last time about the different forms of abuse, it's not only the physical, but there are many different other forms of abuse that have an impact. There is a book that I will be quoting from often during these khutbahs called Before You Tie the Knot. This is a book to help people become prepared for the marital relationship, but as well as to understand how to have a successful marital relationship. And this is a book that was written by a marriage therapist, Salma Abu Qadira, as well as an Imam Muhammad Majid. And so this book, it states that people who have been exposed to domestic violence as children are at risk for getting into abusive relationships as adults, either as victims or as perpetrators. Simply because violence in the family is a learned behavior. Now understand this very closely. Violence is not something that is innate. It is a behavior that is learned. And so people tend to replicate what they've witnessed. So if they see an example before them, good or bad, there's a tendency for people to follow that example, good or bad. So they'll replicate what they witnessed. And so people tend to replicate what they witnessed growing up unless they make some conscious decision to do otherwise. It's a conscious choice. The actions that you make are conscious choices. So any form of abuse or violence that is common in someone's household or family can become the model for what people expect or imagine is normal. So in other words, the relationship, it becomes normalized. It's expected that there will be insults hurled from the parents to the children or from one spouse to another. It becomes normalized. It becomes an expectation. Why? Because they never experienced a healthy marital or family relationship as they were growing up. And so many people who grow up in abusive homes, they're not sure what a healthy relationship looks like because they've never experienced it. And so they might not see the signs of a potentially abusive relationship as when they get older, as they're seeking to start their own family. Whether they're seeking a spouse or when they have children, they might not necessarily see the signs of abuse, either in themselves or in others, because it's become normalized. Now, when reflecting on these above statements of how children who are abused or witness abuse may grow up to become violent themselves or reproduce abusive patterns of behavior, there may be some brothers and sisters here who are listening to this and they realize that this may be their own reality. This was their experience as they grew up. Now, although this might be frightening to some of you, and it may cause some distress to realize that perhaps your own parents may have crossed the line as you were growing up, or that we may minimize abuse we experience in order to be able to move forward in our life. It's imperative. It is important for you to understand that by accepting this, this is not about being disrespectful to your parents. It is not meant to be disrespectful to your parents in any way whatsoever. Rather, by coming to such a major realization, the hope is that by Allah's grace and by Allah's permission and with the support of others, we can effect change within ourselves and within our homes. That's what this is about at the end of the day. We don't know fully what our own parents may have gone through or lived through. So this is never about blaming them, but rather this is about holding ourselves accountable and responsible for our own actions that we consciously choose to take. We can provide our children with the means to have a healthy life, now as well as in the future. Because when they have the model in front of them that they can follow that is good and that is healthy, then that will provide them with an example for them to follow in their future relationships. Consider the following hadith of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. عن أيوب بن موسى رضي الله عنه عن أبيه عن جده أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال ما نحل والد ولدا من نحل أفضل من أجر حسن. That the Prophet ﷺ, he said, there is no gift that a parent or a father gives to their child more virtuous, more precious than adab al-hasan, good manners. That is the best gift we can give to our children, is good character, virtuous manners, etiquette, adab, behavior that is in alignment with the lofty principles of our deen. That's the best thing that we can give to our children. So how is that done? It's done by parents setting an example. By setting a good example so that when their children see how their parents interact with one another, this becomes a model for them to follow. Another negative impact that domestic violence has is through the verbal abuse. This is one of the most common forms of domestic violence, is the verbal abuse. Verbal abuse is extremely hurtful and it can cause long-term psychological damage. Many survivors of multiple forms of abuse, they say that physical injuries eventually heal, but the psychological ones, they never go away. The impact of words never goes away. So this is something to be able to understand, that what we say does and has an impact. It does have an impact. It's not something that it's just something that, okay, you say it and then that's it. There's no effect that comes out of it. It does have an impact. And it will continue to have an impact. Not just in the moment, but in the future as well. When the Prophet ﷺ went on the Isra and the Mi'raj, he saw a sight that made him wonder. He saw a rock or a small hole. There are different narrations. And from this rock, there was a huge bull that came out of this rock. And this huge bull that came from a small rock or a hole then it tried to go back into where it came out of. And it couldn't. It was butting its head to get back into where it came out. And so then the Prophet ﷺ, on seeing this, he said, Ya Jibreel, oh Jibreel, what is this? And so Jibreel alayhi salam, he said, هذا الرجل يتكلم بالكلمة العظيمة فيندم عليها فيريد أن يردها فلا يستطيع. That this is the likeness of one who says something with their mouth, an enormity, an evil word, something that they regret or that they feel remorse, but they're unable to take it back. Once it comes out, it can't go back in. Once a word, whether it be an insult or a swear or a curse, that has an effect or impact on others, once it comes out, you can't take it back in. So be aware. Our words have an impact. And the vast majority of cases of abuse are based on verbal. It's based on verbal as well as emotional abuse. And sometimes it's difficult to differentiate between the two because one causes the other. And so, also think about the following story from the seerah of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl, when he wanted to become a Muslim, there was a point where he tried to escape. That the Muslims were gaining power and that he was seeing that more and more people were accepting Islam. So this is the son of Abu Jahl, who's one of the worst enemies of Islam. And so he wants to escape. He says that there's no way for him to be able to get away from this. So he goes to the sea, and he wants to take a boat so that he can ride the sea and leave the Arabian Peninsula to get away from it all. When he gets to the seashore and he wants to get on a boat, he then sees that those who are controlling the boat, who are responsible for taking him, they're Muslims. And so he said to himself, the very thing that I was seeking to escape now is before me. And at that point he realized that Islam was the truth. So faith entered into his heart, but now he had another problem. How is he going to accept Islam? If he goes back to Mecca, where the Prophet ﷺ is there for the Fath, right? That now the Prophet ﷺ, he has opened Mecca, and that many people are entering into Islam. So he's concerned. How is he going to go back and accept Islam? And so his wife, Hakim bint al-Harith bin Hisham, she said, I will ask the Prophet ﷺ for protection for this. And so he agreed. So she went back to the Prophet ﷺ and she said, Ikrimah wants to become a Muslim. Will you grant him protection? And so then the Prophet ﷺ guaranteed his protection. And so when Ikrimah was making his way to Mecca, in order to make his pledge of allegiance to the Messenger of Allah ﷺ to accept Islam, what did the Prophet ﷺ say to his Sahaba? He said to them, يَأْتِيكُمْ عِكْرِمَةٌ ibn Abi Jahl مُؤْمِنًا مُهَاجِرًا فَلَا تَسُبُّوا أَبَاهُ فَإِنَّ سَبَّ الْمَيِّتِ يُؤْذِي الْحَيِّ وَلَا يَبْلُغُ الْمَوْتِ. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, Ikrimah is now coming as a believer and as a muhajir. He is coming to you. Do not curse his father. Do not say insults to him or mention insults about his father. Because insulting the dead only harms the living and it doesn't reach the dead. This is what the Prophet ﷺ said. And so when Ikrimah came to the door of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ got up out of joy. And he went and he greeted him enthusiastically, delighted with the coming or the arrival of Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl as a Muslim. And so here you have the son of one of the worst enemies of Islam, Abu Jahl. And the Prophet ﷺ prohibited, forbade his companions from cursing Abu Jahl in the presence of Ikrimah. Abu Jahl is somebody who, one, is dead, and two, deserves to be cursed. Because he's one of the most accursed people, one of the great enemies of Islam. So not only is he deserving of curse, but he's also dead, And the Prophet ﷺ prohibited his companions from cursing Abu Jahl, saying that the cursing causes grief to the living, but it doesn't reach the dead. So even though Abu Jahl deserves being cursed as an enemy of Islam, and he's dead, the Prophet ﷺ forbade it. So how can one insult? How can somebody insult or throw curses or use words that cause harm towards members of their own family, who are not enemies of Islam, who are not people that deserve being insulted or cursed? They're members of your family that you should love and show compassion towards. And so this is something that is to show, this is an example, that there is no benefit whatsoever. In fact, there's only harm that comes out of verbal abuse and things that we consider. And this leads to another form of abuse, which is psychological. Because when somebody says something, it can have an effect on a person's emotions, and it can make them feel intimidated. And so the impact that all forms of abuse have psychologically is very deep. All forms of abuse have a deep psychological impact on the person being abused. Some forms of abuse are very hard to pinpoint or observe, because people, they might isolate themselves. They might feel a sense of intimidation. These things might even happen between people in private. That one person, it could be a spouse goes to the other and says, if you don't do this, this is what's going to happen to you. Nobody else knows about it, but then the person feels it. They feel threatened. They feel intimidated. They feel that they're being controlled or manipulated. All of these are different forms of abuse. And so this is something that is very, very dangerous. And there's another form of abuse that we see happen often, unfortunately, and is very dangerous, and it's spiritual abuse. What is spiritual abuse? It's when you use the religion, you use the deen in order to be able to control or to manipulate or to intimidate someone else. And so this form of abuse is particularly devastating to people of faith because it interferes with the victim's relationship with their Lord, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it includes a wide range of behaviors. It includes labeling a person as a bad Muslim and using that in order to help control them or to intimidate them. Preventing a person from worshiping or studying about Islam. Forcing a person to practice in a manner that they're not comfortable with. Or using a hadith or verses in the Quran out of their context. Misinterpreting these verses or a hadith in order so that you can control someone or to manipulate their behavior. And so sometimes you might find like a husband who might be abusive towards his wife by misusing his authority as a leader of the family to command particular behavior, claiming that the wife will go to hell if she doesn't obey her husband and everything that he tells her to do. Obedience to the husband is not meant to be absolute. Because the Prophet ﷺ, he said, لا طاعة لمخلوق في معصية الخالق. I've heard of statements, and this is not, I'm not joking. I've heard of statements where a husband will go to his wife and he says, if I tell you to go and to get a knife from the kitchen and to slit your throat, you have to obey because I'm your husband and you're my wife. This is not what Islam teaches whatsoever. In fact, it goes against the teachings of Islam. And so there's this type of understanding that it's a misunderstanding. And people have to be very aware and careful of it. That this type of abuse that creates conflict for women, they might not realize that this is what the husband is doing. That it's actually a form of spiritual abuse. And it can go both ways. Wives can use it towards their husbands, but most often cases, it's husbands towards their wives. And so we have to understand that the authority that is given to a husband within a family is that it's about building a healthy marital relationship. It is never about power or abuse. And if it is about control, then you're transgressing boundaries. And husbands will be taken into account by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This idea in terms of even the verses of the Quran, there's one verse of the Quran that is used most often to misinterpret, and I'm going to dedicate a whole khutbah just to this one verse in Surah An-Nisa. And so it's important that we have a sound understanding of these matters so that we do not fall into acts of abuse when it comes to our families. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله العظيم من كل سائر المسلمين من كل ذنب فاستغفروه إنه غفور رحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. I'll conclude with a statement of Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, one of the great scholars of Islam, in which he described our Sharia, the laws of Islam or the Sharia. And he said, verily the Sharia is based and founded upon wisdom and welfare for the servants, for al-ibad, in this world as well as in the hereafter. In its entirety, all of it, it is based on justice. All of it is mercy. All of it is benefit or maslahah. All of it is wisdom. That's what our Sharia is. These four great virtues and attributes of adl, of rahmah, of hikmah, of maslahah. That's what our Sharia is. And so he continues and he says, every matter which abandons justice for tyranny, or mercy for the opposite, for cruelty, or benefit for corruption, or wisdom for foolishness, it is not a part of the Sharia, even if it was introduced into it through interpretation. It is not part of the Sharia. The basis of our faith are those four attributes and characteristics and traits. So this is a profound statement that indicates the entire basis of our religion of Islam. And it should serve to indicate that if our actions go beyond mercy or justice or wisdom or benefit, as defined by the Book of Allah and through the Sunnah of the Messenger of Allah, then we have transgressed. We have indeed transgressed, and it is necessary that we bring ourselves back into the fold of these eternal values and ethics in our beliefs, in our statements, in our actions, and in our intentions. And so we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us a people of mercy, of justice, of wisdom, and of benefit. And that we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to purify ourselves and our homes from any form of haram or oppression or abuse that may take place. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات المسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات إنك يا ربنا سميع قريب مجيب الدعوات. ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين. اللهم ارحم موتانا وموتى المسلمين واشف مرضانا ومرضى المسلمين. اللهم انصر إخواننا المستضعفين المظلومين في كل مكان، انصرهم في مشارق الأرض وفي مغاربها، والطف بنا وبجميع المسلمين بلطفك فيما جرت به المقادير. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار والحمد لله رب العالمين وآخر السلام.